A Cyclops, meaning circle-eyed, is a one-eyed giant first appearing in the mythology of ancient Greece. The Greeks believed that there was an entire race of Cyclops who lived in a faraway land without law and order. Homer, in his Iliad, describes the Cyclops as pastoral but savage, typical of the strange creatures the Greeks created to represent foreign societies not regarded as civilized as themselves. The Cyclops are not without talents, though, and are credited with manufacturing the thunderbolts, which Zeus used as a terrible throwing weapon and as the builders of gigantic fortification walls such as those still seen at Mycenaean sites today. The most famous Cyclops is Polyphemus, who captured the Greek hero Odysseus and his men only for them to escape by blinding the poor giant. Cyclops, and particularly the Odysseus story, were popular and enduring subjects in all forms of Greek and Roman art. The Hesiodic, the Homeric, and the wall builders. In Hesiod's Theogony, the Cyclops are the three brothers, Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, sons of Uranus and Gaia, who made for Zeus his characteristic weapon, the thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, the Cyclops are an uncivilized group of shepherds, one of whom, Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, is encountered by Odysseus. Cyclops were also said to have been the builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tiryns. A scholiast, quoting the 5th century BC historian Hellanicus, tells us that, in addition to the Hesiodic Cyclops, whom the scholiast describes as the gods themselves, and the Homeric Cyclops, there was a third group of Cyclops, the builders of the walls of Mycenae. Hesiod, in the Theogony, 700 BC, described three Cyclops, Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, who were the sons of Uranus, sky, and Gaia, earth, and the brothers of the Titans and Hundred-Handers, and who had a single eye set in the middle of their foreheads. They made for Zeus his all-powerful thunderbolt, and in so doing, the Cyclops played a key role in the Greek succession myth, which told how the Titan Cronus overthrew his father Uranus, and how in turn Zeus overthrew Cronus and his fellow Titans, and how Zeus was eventually established as the final and permanent ruler of the cosmos. The names that Hesiod gives them, Argus, bright, Brontes, thunder, and Steropus, lightning, reflect their fundamental role as thunderbolt makers. As early as the late 7th century BC, the Cyclops could be used by the Spartan poet Tyrtaeus to epitomize extraordinary size and strength. According to the accounts of Hesiod and the mythographer Apollodorus, the Cyclops had been imprisoned by their father Uranus. Zeus later freed the Cyclops, and they repaid him by giving him the thunderbolt. The Cyclops provided for Hesiod, and other Theogony writers, a convenient source of heavenly weaponry, since the smith god Hephaestus, who would eventually take over that role, had not yet been born. According to Apollodorus, the Cyclops also provided Poseidon with his trident and Hades with his cap of invisibility, and the gods used these weapons to defeat the Titans. Although the primordial Cyclops of the Theogony were presumably immortal, as were their brothers the Titans, the 6th century BC Hesiodic catalogue of women has them being killed by Apollo. Later sources tell us why. Apollo's son Asclepius had been killed by Zeus' thunderbolt, and Apollo killed the Cyclops, the makers of the thunderbolt, in revenge. According to a scholiast on Euripides' Alcestis, the 5th century BC mythographer Pherecydes supplied the same motive, but said that Apollo, rather than killing the Cyclops, killed their sons, one of whom he named Aortes, instead. No other source mentions any offspring of the Cyclops. A Pindar fragment suggests that Zeus himself killed the Cyclops to prevent them from making thunderbolts for anyone else. The Cyclops' prowess as craftsmen is stressed by Hesiod, who says, "Strength and force and contrivances were in their works." Being such skilled craftsmen of great size and strength, later poets, beginning with the 3rd century BC poet Callimachus, imagined these Cyclops, the primordial makers of Zeus' thunderbolt, becoming the assistants of the smith god Hephaestus, at his forge in Sicily, underneath Mount Etna, or perhaps the nearby Aeolian Islands. In his hymn to Artemis, Callimachus has the Cyclops on the Aeolian island of Lipari, working, at the anvils of Hephaestus, make the bows and arrows used by Apollo and Artemis. The 1st century BC Latin poet Virgil, in his epic Aeneid, has the Cyclops, Brontes and Steropus and bare-limbed Pyracmon, toil under the direction of Vulcan, Hephaestus, in caves underneath Mount Etna and the Aeolian Islands. Virgil describes the Cyclops, in Vulcan's smithy forging iron, making a thunderbolt, a chariot for Mars, and Pallas's aegis, with Vulcan interrupting their work to command the Cyclops to fashion arms for Aeneas. The later Latin poet Ovid also has the Hesiodic Cyclops, Brontes and Steropus, along with a 3rd Cyclops named Achmonides, work at forges in Sicilian caves. In an episode of Homer's Odyssey, 700 BC, the hero Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, a one-eyed man-eating giant who lives with his fellow Cyclops in a distant land. The relationship between these Cyclops and Hesiod's Cyclops is unclear. Homer described a very different group of Cyclops than the skilled and subservient craftsmen of Hesiod. Homer's Cyclops live in the world of men, rather than among the gods, as they presumably do in the Theogony. The Homeric Cyclops are presented as uncivilized shepherds, who live in caves, savages with no regard for Zeus. They have no knowledge of agriculture, ships or craft. They live apart and lack any laws. The 5th century BC playwright Euripides also told the story of Odysseus' encounter with Polyphemus in his satyr play Cyclops. Euripides' Cyclops, like Homer's, are uncultured cave-dwelling shepherds. They have no agriculture, no wine, and live on milk, cheese and the meat of sheep. They live solitary lives, and have no government. They are inhospitable to strangers, slaughtering and eating all who come to their land. While Homer does not say if the other Cyclops are like Polyphemus in their appearance and parentage, Euripides makes it explicit, calling the Cyclops Poseidon's one-eyed sons, and while Homer is vague as to their location, Euripides locates the land of the Cyclops on the island of Sicily near Mount Etna. Like Euripides, Virgil has the Cyclops of Polyphemus live on Sicily near Etna. For Virgil apparently, these Homeric Cyclops are members of the same race of Cyclops as Hesiod's Brontes and Steropus, who live nearby. Cyclops were also said to have been the builders of the so-called Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Argos.
Although they can be seen as being distinct, the Cyclopean wall builders share several features with the Hesiodic Cyclops. Both groups are craftsmen of supernatural skill, possessing enormous strength, who lived in primordial times. These builder Cyclops were apparently used to explain the construction of the stupendous walls at Mycenaean and Tyrans, composed of massive stones that seemed too large and heavy to have been moved by ordinary men.
These master builders were famous in antiquity from at least the 5th century BC onwards. The poet Pindar has Heracles driving the cattle of Geryon through the Cyclopean portal of the Tyrrhenian king Eurystheus. The mythographer Pherecydes says that Perseus brought the Cyclops with him from Seriphos to Argos, presumably to build the walls of Mycenae. Proetus, the mythical king of ancient Argos, was said to have brought a group of 7 Cyclops from Lycia to build the walls of Tiryns. The late 5th and early 4th century BC comic poet Nicophon wrote a play called either Chirogastors or Enchirogastors, Hands to Mouth, which is thought to have been about these Cyclopean wall builders. Ancient lexicographers explained the title as meaning those who feed themselves by manual labor, and, according to Eustathius of Thessalonica, the word was used to describe the Cyclopean wall builders, while hands to mouth was one of the 3 kinds of Cyclops distinguished by Scholia to Aelius Aristides. Similarly, possibly deriving from Nicophon's comedy, the 1st century Greek geographer Strabo says these Cyclops were called belly hands, gasterocheres, because they earned their food by working with their hands. The 1st century natural philosopher Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, reported a tradition, attributed to Aristotle, that the Cyclops were the inventors of masonry towers. In the same work, Pliny also mentions the Cyclops as being among those credited with being the first to work with iron, as well as bronze. In addition to walls, other monuments were attributed to the Cyclops. For example, Pausanias says that at Argos there was a head of Medusa made of stone, which is said to be another of the works of the Cyclops. The most famous encounter between humans and a Cyclops was during the long voyage home from the Trojan War endured by the hero Odysseus. The story is recounted most famously in the Odyssey by Homer. Mid-journey at an unknown location, the hero stops at an island for supplies. Unfortunately, the island was also inhabited by the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of the nymph Theusa and Poseidon, and the giant took a distinct fancy to the traveling Greeks. Trapping them in his cave by blocking the entrance with a huge boulder only a giant could move, he swiftly ate 2 as an appetizer and then later a couple more of the hapless travelers. Seeing the gravity of the situation, Odysseus, known for his intelligence and quick wits, developed a cunning plan of escape. Tempting Polyphemus with wine until the Cyclops was drunk, the hero ordered his men to turn Polyphemus' olive wood staff into a spike. This they then hardened in a fire and then used it to blind the Cyclops while he slept. Unable to see and understandably livid at his treatment, Polyphemus tried to catch the still trapped travelers by feeling his sheep as they left the cave for their grazing. Odysseus then instructed his men to tie themselves to the bellies of the sheep whilst he chose a ram for the purpose, and thus they escaped to continue their voyage. However, the Cyclops, after unsuccessfully hurling a boulder to try and smash the fastly disappearing Greek ship, cursed Odysseus, predicting the loss of his men, a wearisome voyage home, and disaster when he finally arrived there. Calling on the help of his father Poseidon, Polyphemus ensured that it would be many a storm and 10 long years before Odysseus reached Ithaca. The Cyclops helped the Olympian gods led by Zeus to defeat the Titans in their 10-year battle, known as the Titanomachy, for control of the universe. The Cyclops, in gratitude for their release after Uranus had imprisoned them in Tartarus for unruly behavior, made the thunderbolts that Zeus used as a weapon to strike down his enemies. Victims hit by Zeus' well-aimed thunderbolts included Asclepius when Zeus considered that his medical skills had become so wonderful that he was a threat to the eternal division between humanity and the gods. The Cyclops also made the helmet of Hades, which made the wearer invisible, the trident of Poseidon, and the silver bow of Artemis. Another area of expertise the Cyclops excelled at was building walls. Large Mycenaean fortification walls were credited to them. Such was the huge size and irregular shape of the blocks used. The Acropolis of Mycenae and Tiryns still have today long stretches of these Cyclopean walls. The Cyclops are both the title and subject of a satyr play by Euripides, 484 to 407 BCE, the great writer of Greek tragedy. The plot is much like Homer's Odyssey, but with the added character of the elderly satyr named Silenus, who gives additional help to Odysseus and his men as they battle wits with Polyphemus. Another traditional story of Polyphemus involves him hopelessly trying to woo the sea nymph Galatea, a tale popular with ancient pastoral writers and an early prototype for the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. In the better-known version, Polyphemus sings a love song to Galatea but without any effect, except to surprise the nymph's actual lover Acis, who tries to swim away but is crushed and drowned after the Cyclops employs his weapon of choice and throws a huge rock at him. In the lesser-known version, Polyphemus is more successful in his ambitions and he and Galatea have a son called Gales, or Galates, who became the ancestor of the Gauls. The struggle between Odysseus and Polyphemus was a popular subject for painters of Greek pottery, with the blinding of the Cyclops being by far the most common and enduring scene chosen. Appearing on the black figure pottery of many different Greek city-states, the earliest known instance of this terrible deed is on the neck of a 7th century BCE Proto-Attic amphora from Eleusis. Odysseus and two men carry the spiked pole above their heads and, curiously, one figure is painted white, a color usually reserved for women, but perhaps here an attempt to pick out Odysseus as the group's leader. The vase can be seen today in the Archaeological Museum at Eleusis. In this and other such scenes, Polyphemus is typically seated on the floor, probably to show his collapsed drunkenness. He sometimes holds a cup or a wineskin suggestively hangs from a tree in the background, although it may also be an artistic necessity to fit the giant and men on the same horizontal plane. In some of these scenes, Polyphemus does not always have just one eye, or at least not obviously so. The blinding scene and also the escape tied to the sheep of Polyphemus appear on vases for the next 2 centuries, although this part of the Odyssey story ceased to be a popular subject with later red figure pottery painters.